Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
It seems like everyone's always searching for the secret to a longer life. But more importantly, I think, how to make sure those extra years are actually good ones. Not just adding years to your life, but life to your years.
Absolutely. That's the real goal, isn't it? And while we haven't quite cracked the code on immortality, there's some really cool new research that might point us in the right direction.
Okay, color me intrigued. What's this research all about?
Well, you've probably heard that inflammation is a big factor in those chronic diseases that tend to crop up as we get older: heart disease, diabetes, even the muscle loss that makes us feel weaker. It's like this low-grade simmering process happening inside us that sets the stage for a whole host of problems.
Yeah, inflammation definitely sounds like something we want to avoid. But how does this new research tie into that?
This is where it gets really interesting. Scientists have been on the hunt for a kind of universal aging marker, something that could tell us how our bodies are aging at a fundamental level. And the study suggests we may have stumbled onto a crucial piece of that puzzle. It's a receptor called the ectodisplacin A2 receptor.
Ecto say what now? I think you might have to break that down for me. What exactly is this receptor and why is it so important?
Think of a receptor like a lock on the surface of a cell, just waiting for the right key to come along and unlock it. In this case, the ectodisplacin A2 receptor sits on all sorts of different cells throughout the body, and when it gets activated, it can set off a whole chain reaction, including things like cell death and, you guessed it, inflammatory responses.
So this receptor is kind of like a switch that can flip on inflammation.
Exactly. And what's really remarkable is that the researchers found that the activity of the gene that makes this receptor steadily increases with age. And this happens in practically every single part of the body. They weren't just looking at one specific organ or tissue. They saw this pattern across the board: hearts, lungs, muscles, you name it.
Hold on. So it's not just that this receptor is more active in, let's say, an older person's heart compared to a younger person's heart.
Yeah.
It's actually increasing everywhere as we get older.
That's right. And here's the real clincher. It wasn't just a slight increase either. When they analyzed this huge database of genetic information, the ectodisplacin A2 receptor was the #1 gene associated with aging. Talk about a big red flag.
So they're looking at this massive amount of data, and this one receptor keeps popping up as linked to aging regardless of where they look in the body. That's a pretty strong connection, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And to make things even more interesting, they found the same pattern in studies with rodents, even mice, that age super quickly. This hints that the link between the ectodisplacin A2 receptor and aging might be a fundamental biological process, not just a quirk of being human.
Okay, so we've got this receptor that seems to be deeply connected to aging, and it's involved in inflammation, which we already know is a major culprit in so many age-related diseases. But did the researchers figure out if this receptor is just a marker of aging, or if it's actually driving the aging process itself?
That's the million-dollar question, and they didn't stop at just observing this correlation. They wanted to see if they could actually manipulate the levels of the ectodisplacin A2 receptor and observe what happened.
So they were basically trying to turn the levels of this receptor up or down and see if it changed how cells aged.
Precisely. They used cell cultures, basically cells growing in a dish, and they were able to either force the cells to produce more of the receptor or block its activity altogether.
And what did they find? Did messing with the levels of this receptor actually have any effect?
The results were pretty amazing. When they cranked up the production of the ectodisplacin A2 receptor, it was like they hit fast forward on the aging process for those cells. They saw a big spike in inflammatory signals, and they also noticed disruptions in important pathways involved in muscle health.
So it's like making those cells produce more of this receptor is pushing them to act older, especially when it comes to how their muscles function.
You got it. And get this, they found the reverse was true as well. When they blocked the activity of the receptor, it actually reduced some of those negative effects on the cells.
Wait a minute, so if I'm following you correctly,
Yeah.
increasing this ectodisplacin A2 receptor seems to make cells act older, but blocking it seems to protect them. Is that what they're saying?
That's exactly it. And that's where the possibility of developing new therapies really starts to get exciting. If we can figure out a way to safely and effectively target this receptor, it could have a huge impact on how we treat or even prevent age-related diseases in the future.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, you mentioned some limitations earlier. What are some of the things we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, of course, it's super important to remember that this is all still pretty early in the research game. This study was really focused on establishing this connection between the ectodyspalin's A2 receptor and aging, but there are still tons of unanswered questions.
So what are the next steps? What kind of research needs to happen to figure out if this receptor is a good target for therapies?
Well, one thing we really need is more research done with humans. This study involved analyzing genetic data and doing experiments in cells, but we need to see how this receptor actually behaves in real people as they age.
So like clinical trials, where they see if blocking this receptor actually makes a difference in people's health.
That's the idea. We have to see if manipulating this receptor can slow down or even reverse age-related decline in people and make sure it's safe to do so. I mean, there's always that risk of unexpected side effects when you're messing with something as complex as aging.
Right. We don't want to solve one problem and create a bunch of new ones in the process.
Yeah.
But speaking of solutions, the study did mention a few things that seem to reduce the activity of this receptor, right?
Yes, and this is where things might get especially interesting for listeners who are thinking, okay, so what can I actually do about this? The researchers pointed out a few things that seem to lower the expression of the ectodysplasin A2 receptor, including calorie restriction and exercise.
Uh,
So the good old healthy lifestyle advice strikes again. But seriously, it's pretty amazing to think that something as simple as diet and exercise could impact this aging pathway.
It really shows how interconnected our bodies are and how much influence lifestyle choices can have on our health, even down to the molecular level.
But they also talked about a couple of more specific things too, right? Like ginkgo biloba and metformin.
They did. And while those findings are definitely intriguing, it's important to say that the evidence is still very preliminary. We need a lot more solid research to really confirm those effects and figure out safe dosages and potential risks.
So don't go rushing out to buy ginkgo biloba just yet.
Exactly. Always a good idea to talk to your doctor before starting any new supplements or making big changes to your health routine. Words to live by. So we've got this really fascinating new research that's found a possible key player in the aging process, this ectodysplasin A2 receptor. We've seen that it seems to promote inflammation and contribute to age-related changes in cells, especially muscle tissue, and we've discussed the need for more research to explore its potential as a target for therapies. But what does all this mean for the average person who just wants to live a healthy life? What's the big takeaway here?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that this research provides us with another piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding how aging works. And even though there's a lot we still don't know, the more we learn about the underlying mechanisms of aging, the better prepared we'll be to develop strategies to slow it down or maybe even reverse some of its negative effects.
So it's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain of aging, and that knowledge could lead to some pretty amazing breakthroughs down the line.
Exactly. And in the meantime, this research really reinforces the importance of those healthy lifestyle choices we've been hearing about for years. Things like keeping a healthy weight, eating a good diet, and getting regular exercise aren't just good for our overall health. They could also be influencing the activity of this receptor and possibly even slowing down the aging process itself.
So while we're waiting for those potential breakthroughs, we can still take steps to age more healthily by making those tried and true healthy habits part of our lives. It's pretty empowering to know that we have some control over how we age.
Absolutely. And I think this research also highlights the incredible power of science to unravel the mysteries of our bodies and find solutions to some of our most pressing health challenges.
It's exciting to imagine what the future holds as we keep exploring this new frontier of aging research. But before we go too far down that road, I want to bring the focus back to something you said earlier about needing more research in humans. What specific aspects of this receptor still need to be investigated?
There are definitely several key areas that need more exploration. For instance, we need to understand how the activity of this receptor differs from person to person. Is there a genetic component that makes some people more vulnerable to its effects? And how do factors like lifestyle and environment affect its activity? Answering these questions could help us personalize our approaches to aging healthfully.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not like aging is a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Everyone ages differently, and it follows that our approaches to healthy aging should probably be personalized to our individual needs and situations.
Exactly. Another really crucial area of research is figuring out the long-term effects of manipulating this receptor. We need to be absolutely sure that any interventions aimed at this receptor are safe and effective over the long term.
Right, we wouldn't want to fix one thing only to create another issue down the line. So it sounds like we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but the potential benefits are huge. Imagine a future where we could actually slow down or reverse some of the most debilitating parts of aging.
It's a pretty amazing idea. And while we're not quite there yet, this research gives us a little glimmer of hope that it could be possible someday. And even if those breakthroughs are still years away, the knowledge we're gaining about the aging process itself is incredibly valuable. It's giving us the power to make smarter choices about our health and be more proactive about how we age.
I really like that way of looking at it. It's not about just accepting aging passively. It's about embracing the opportunities to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. But this research also brings up some pretty big questions about aging itself, don't you think?
It definitely does. If we can start to manipulate the activity of receptors like the ectodisplasin A2 receptor and maybe even slow down or reverse some of the hallmarks of aging, what does that mean for how we understand lifespan?
That's a huge question. Are we talking about possibly extending human lifespan beyond what we currently think of as the natural limit?
It's a possibility that we can't really ignore anymore. And it brings up a whole bunch of ethical and societal questions that we need to start thinking about now.
It's like we're on the brink of a brand new era
Yeah.
in aging research, an era where we might be able to not only treat age-related diseases, but actually change the aging process itself. That's both incredibly exciting and a bit intimidating.
I agree. It's a big reminder that scientific progress comes with great responsibility. We have to make sure we're using this knowledge wisely and ethically in a way that benefits everyone.
Very well said. This has been a really thought-provoking discussion. We've gone from a deep dive into the specifics of this fascinating new research on the ectodisplasin A2 receptor to a bigger exploration of the possibilities and challenges of aging research as a whole. But before we wrap things up, I want to bring the focus back to our listeners. What's the one main message you hope they take away from this episode?
If I had to pick one thing I really hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that aging is this super complex process, but it's not totally out of our control. You know what I mean? This research on the ectodisplasin A2 receptor is really exciting because it gives us like a real target, a potential way to step in and maybe slow down certain aspects of getting older.
Yeah, it's like this receptor is giving us a glimpse behind the scenes of aging, and that kind of knowledge is powerful stuff. But it's also important to remember we're still just scratching the surface here, right? There's so much more we need to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes this whole area's research so captivating. We're constantly finding these new layers of complexity. It's like, whoa, we didn't even know that was there. It challenges everything we thought we knew and pushes the boundaries of what we thought was possible. And as we keep digging into this research, we're probably going to find even more fascinating connections and potential targets for therapies.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. And with every layer, we're learning something new and cool about how our bodies age. But with all this excitement about potential therapies and breakthroughs, we also have to be careful and think things through right. We talked about the possibility of unintended consequences, and of course there are all those ethical implications to consider as well.
You're right on the money. It's super important that we move forward thoughtfully and responsibly, you know. We need to have these open and honest conversations about the potential upsides and downsides of actually manipulating the aging process. And it's not just scientists who need to be part of that conversation. It needs to include ethicists, policymakers, and everyday people, too.
It reminds us that scientific progress isn't just about making discoveries in a lab. It's about figuring out how to use that knowledge in a way that benefits all of us. And as we explore this new frontier of aging research, we need to really consider the potential impact and make sure we're using this knowledge for good.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about striking that delicate balance, you know, between pushing the limits of scientific exploration while still being aware of our ethical responsibilities.
So where do we go from here? What's next in this whole unfolding story of aging research?
Well, the research on the ectodisplasin A2 receptor is definitely still in its early stages, but it's already causing quite a buzz in the scientific community. I think we're going to see a ton of new research in the coming years looking at its role in different tissues and organs, figuring out how it interacts with other aging pathways, and of course, those clinical trials to test whether potential therapies are safe and actually work.
It's like we've opened this door to a whole world of possibilities, and now we have to go explore them carefully and responsibly.
Exactly. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning. As we continue to untangle all the complexities of aging, we're likely to find even more surprising connections and potential targets for intervention. Who knows, maybe someday we'll look back at this time as a turning point, the moment when we really started to understand the aging process and how to use it for good.
That's a pretty inspiring thought. And I have to say, after this deep dive, I'm feeling optimistic about what the future holds for aging research. It's clear there's still a lot to learn, but the progress we're making is pretty remarkable, and the potential to improve people's health and well-being is just huge.
It's definitely an exciting time to be alive, and I'm grateful to be a part of this incredible journey of discovery.
Me too. And to everyone listening out there, remember, knowledge is power. Stay curious, keep learning, and keep the conversation going about how we can age in a healthier, happier, and more fulfilling way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing world of aging research.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.